Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about the rise and fall of Carlos Condit. And I want to start this by saying he was, for me, a really, really fun fighter. One of the fighters like a cowboy, who is my favorite fighter of all time. Whether it was he never adapted his takedown defense, but every single time he got taken down, when he got back up, he was always throwing. He was always doing something. A perfect example of that is when he fought Johnny Hendricks. Johnny Hendricks took him down again and again and again and again, and every single time he got taken down, he got back up and was constantly in Johnny Hendricks' face. Yes, he was on the wrong end of a decision in that fight, but it showed on, my God, this guy is always active. He's always throwing. He's using elbows, punches, knees, kicks. I mean, he was literally doing everything. And again, I started watching him back in the WEC times. Like, one of the first fights I seen him fight was against what's his freaking name, Brock Larson, when he armbarred him. But I remember going back and watching his fight against John Alessio when Alessio, I believe, called him out, and he was 19-9 at that point, was John Alessio, and he ended up getting submitted at the very end of the second round. And again, his first fight was against Kyle Jensen. At the time, was 29-9. It was a very, very well thought of guy in that time. And Carlos Condit went in there, won the title, and then defended against Alessio, Larson, Prater, and I believe he also defended it against Mora, Hiromitsu Mora, I think that's what it is. And that fight is very interesting. I believe he got hurt a couple times in that fight when I was watching it, and then his cardio was a little weird, but in the fourth round, about 4 minutes and 43 seconds into it, he catches him with a knee and was able to finish him. And again, this is a guy who lost to Jake Shields. Pat Healy was actually submitted by Pat Healy. Lost by a heel hook against Satoru Kitoka. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But he went 8-0 until he lost to Carlo Prater. And obviously, as we know, came back and defeated Carlo Prater by guillotine in the first round. And then he made his debut in the UFC against Martin the Hitman Campman. In the fight, I remember turning the TV on, marking my calendar. Okay, this is when Carlos Condit is making his UFC debut. It was huge. 2009, April 1st, Jesus, and it went out there, and that fight really surprised me. It showed me how good Campman was, because every single time that Carlos Condit got momentum and he was started to go for it, he started to be one step behind Campman. Campman did a very good job in that fight, if you go watch it, of going first, making Carlos Condit react instead of Carlos being able to set up his strikes, making Carlos back up. And Campman won a very close split decision. I remember watching that and thinking Carlos may have lost this, and he ended up losing it. It was a very strange feeling, being really young as I was, 15 years old at the time. And then he came back, 5 months later, and fought Jake Ellenberger right before Jake had that breakout a couple years. And Jake Ellenberger, I believe that was Jake's debut as well, caught Carlos with a big punch. I think it was a big punch, hurt him, scrambled a little bit, and then Carlos Condit came back in the second and the third round to defeat Jake Ellenberger in a fight that was scary for a little bit. I remember watching the fight and be like, "Oh man, Dad, you got to look at this." And me and my dad watched this fight and was like, "Oh, geez, Carlos being able to survive that was kind of crazy," because he really, really got hurt by Jake. And then Jake kind of ran out of gas in the second and third round. And then he fights Rory McDonald, and kind of a controversial fight, to be honest. Rory McDonald winning the first, the second, and 4 minutes and 45 seconds of the third round, until Carlos started to have some success, bust him up a little bit, and the referee stopped it. I understand Rory had a broken orbital and all that stuff, but very, very weird stoppage. And it was Rory's first defeat at that time. And Carlos didn't look great, but he got the job done. When he needed to go for it, he went for it, and he got it, even if it is controversial. Then he fights Dan Hardy. I believe in Dan Hardy's backyard. Fights Dan Hardy, and we hadn't really seen what we had seen in kind of the WEC. We hadn't seen his really, really good guard. We haven't seen his submissions at that time. And we hadn't really seen him with big power. We've seen him as a good striker and all those things. Well, when he fights Dan Hardy, he ends up being the only person in Dan Hardy's career to actually finish Dan with punches, and it showed how much power he had. They both were swinging. Big left hook from Carlos Condit was a little tighter and just caught Dan Hardy and was able to finish him. And that's a big win, especially at that time. That was a huge win. And then he fights Dong Young Kim, and Dong Young Kim at the time 14-0, and a fight I was very, very nervous for Condit for, because Dong Young Kim at that time, I believe he's retired now, but at that time was very tough because Kim was a good striker, but he's trying to get a hold of you, trying to find submissions, grapple. And I believe it's the same guy who only lost 2 times after this Carlos Condit fight. Yeah, and, again, he goes out there and he pushes Kim back, catches him with a flying knee, and is able to put him out and finish him. Very, very impressive win on that one at that time, of course, And then defeats Nick Diaz in another kind of controversial fight. Another fight that you're like, okay, Condit he's very well-rounded. He uses a lot of his weapons. He's not like a one-punch guy. He throws a lot of combinations. Nick Diaz did a very, very good job in that fight of, again, going first. And Carlos, where he did a lot of good things, was ending with like kicks. And of course, we know the when he kicked Nick in the face, and Carlos Condit wins 3-2. Some people thought Nick Diaz won. It's a very, very close fight. Nick did good things. Carlos did good things. Very, very good. And then he fights GSP. And besides the round, I think the second round, when Carlos again ends his combination with a kick, he hurts GSP, can't get him out of there, and ends up losing a decision. That's okay. Comes back and fights Johnny Hendricks. And Johnny Hendricks takes him down over and over and over and over and over again. Wins 29-28, but I felt like Carlos's stock rose when I was watching that because he was constantly going. He couldn't stop the takedowns, but there wasn't much damage-wise coming back from Johnny Hendricks. It was just take him down, overwhelm him, take him down, overwhelm him, just volumes of takedowns. And Carlos Condit was just lighting him up with his combinations. He did really, really good work on that. Did lose that, but then he gets the rematch that he had probably been waiting for a long time against Martin Kampmann. And, he goes in there and just volumes Martin Kampmann. Make sure he's going first, all of those things, and end up getting him out of there in the 4th round. So at this time, you're wondering, okay, he's going to start putting a streak here. Let's see what happens. So then they give him Tyron Woodley. And at this time, Tyron Woodley was 12-2. This is the fight that Carlos Condit tore his ACL. Getting leg kicked by Tyron Woodley a couple of times. I believe it was a couple of them in the first round that had hurt his knee, and then the one in the second round that tore it. It was very weird because as the fight was going, you see Carlos start to turn it up a little bit. And it's like, okay, this is going to be fun. And it never really went anywhere because the knee injury. So it was a bitter loss, as a fan of Woodley at the time and Carlos Condit. Thiago Alves comes back. I remember watching it live at my wife's mom's house. And I was worried of Alves's power as Carlos was coming in, because Carlos would have this thing where he would kind of dart in and leave himself open, but he did a really, really good job of, again, ending with kicks or entering with something that Thiago wasn't expecting straight, or if Thiago was coming in, he hit him with an elbow, and that's what broke his nose. That was the doctor stoppage at the end of the second round. That second round was brutal for Alves. He was getting beat up. Then he gets the fight. He gets the chance to fight Robbie Lawler. And as a Carlos Condit fan, and even as a Robbie Lawler fan, I as you watching this video, I'm a Carlos Condit fan, and I like Robbie. I'm a Robbie Lawler fan as he retires here in a few months. this was the fight to where I was like, this is Carlos's chance. This is the best stylistical opponent for Carlos Condit. And the fight played out, honestly, exactly how I thought it was going to. A lot of output, a lot of Carlos Condit advancing first. Robbie trying to catch Carlos as he was darting in, because that would have been a thing Carlos had done a lot of his career. And a lot of the rounds, first round was Carlos Condit. Second round I thought was still Carlos, but a lot of people give the second round to Robbie because he dropped Carlos. Every other moment besides that moment, Carlos Condit won. But I guess that is the most significant part of that round. Then you go to the third, fourth, Carlos Condit. Not even close. Hurts him, I believe, at the end of the third round, of a punch right behind, like right on the ear. Hurts him against the cage. Fifth round comes, you're like, okay, well, maybe it's 2-2, but probably 3-1 Carlos. I thought going to the fifth, I was like, Robbie's gonna come out like a bat out of the hell. And he did. Carlos stood his ground with him, threw a lot of combinations, got stung a couple times, and they put on a show in that fifth round. And then Carlos Condit doesn't get the decision. A lot of the media people thought Carlos won 3-2. Again, I had it, 3-2 at that point. Even could have been 4-1, honestly. Because like that fifth round, if Robbie won that fifth, it is not the same round that he won in the second because of the one drop. And it was Carlos being out of position that had got him caught with that big left hand. Either way, Robbie Lawler gets the nod in that. Then Carlos Condit fights Damian Maia in a fight that, before the fight, Carlos talked about he may be done. He may retire. It was devastating. If you go back and watch the post-fight, he thought he won. The crowd thought he won. Rogan thought he won. A lot of people have thought he won that fight. That's where his career changed. He fights Damian Maia, and I remember watching him again in the WEC, and he was good on the ground. Maybe not technical, but he had good submissions. He would throw a lot of things up. He was good defensively. Damian Maia gets a hold of him, and I thought the volume and the kicks from a distance would give Maia a lot of issues. And it really didn't play out like that. Maia got him down, hit him with an elbow, Carlos Condit said, that kind of stunned him a little bit, and then he got rear naked choked in the first round. It was a lot of doubt from Carlos in that fight, coming off of the Robbie Lawler fight. Then he fights Neil Magny in a fight that Carlos just never pulled the trigger. It was another fight where you didn't know if Carlos was 100% in there. And then he comes back and he fights Alex Oliveira, who I don't believe was supposed to be the opponent. I think it was supposed to be Matt Brown. Alex Oliveira comes in, and Alex Oliveira gets the guillotine, I believe, off of, he dropped Carlos and got the guillotine. I think it was like an up kick or something like that. And then loses, gets submitted. So that's, 4 fights in a row. 3 after the Robbie Lawler fight. And you seen this shift in Carlos's, when he was fighting, that sometimes he would go, but sometimes he would wait too much, or sometimes he would keep himself in these dangerous situations. And that wasn't what we had seen before. He wasn't moving. And then Michael Chiesa gets him down. Carlos can't stop the takedowns, and then he gets submitted with a Kimura. And it's Michael Chiesa, So then he takes a little bit of time off. He was scheduled to fight Mickey Gall. That fight is canceled. He comes back and he fights Court McGee, and I thought this was another one. A guy that has good takedowns in Court McGee. His good chin at the time, of course. And this is a tough matchup for Carlos. But if this fight, we're going to see where Carlos is at mentally. So fight comes on. At the end of the first round, Carlos drops him. I was like, okay, he seems a little bit more locked in than he had before. Ends up winning the decision, and and he defeats Court McGee like we were talking about. And I was like, okay. Let's see where we go from here. I think it was 30-27 he won that fight. That was a good performance. What are we gonna do now? Because he had been talking about retirement, maybe not retiring. Then he comes back and he fights Matt Brown. And the fight isn't really what everybody expected. It was a lot of grappling, which, all right, fun fight. Matt Brown loses 29-28 against Carlos. Again, not the fight we were expecting, but it was a lot of good positioning, a lot of good striking from both guys. Fun matchup. On UFC on ABC 1 back in 2021. Then he comes back and he fights Max Griffin, and you know, okay, this is going to be fun. Two really good strikers. First rounds are typically a little rough for Condit. Has been a lot in his career. Comes in there and fights Max Griffin, and he gets caught early, gets dropped, survives. Second round, Carlos turns it up. I was like, oh, okay. Now he's awake. Let's see what happens. And then the third round comes, and Carlos just looked like he didn't come out for that third round. So you're wondering what's going on. He doesn't look to really be firing. He doesn't look to be putting his combinations together. And Max Griffin wins the decision back in 2021. July 10th, actually. And back in the hotel room, Carlos Condit, back in 2021, like I said, hangs up his gloves, puts his gloves down, leaves there without his gloves. He is retiring. Now, there's a lot of interviews of him talking about what was he going to do? Go back to the drawing board, go back out there, try to do it again. He was like, I'm done. I'm done doing this. Now, this is a guy who, before the Robbie Lawler loss, which I believe, to me, is one of the biggest robberies of all time, he was 7-4 in the UFC at that time. Technically 7-3 because his UFC debut he lost with split decision. Okay, so he loses that fight. So he's 7-4. After the Robbie Lawler, he went 9-10. Now, a lot of people are going to be very critical about this, and they're going to say he just wasn't good anymore and all this. I think more than one thing happened. I think the Robbie Lawler fight took a lot out of him. I think a lot of motivation went out of him when he lost that fight because he performed incredible. Yes, Robbie was great in that fifth round, but Robbie wasn't great in the rest of that fight. He just wasn't. Now, was it his game plan to sit back and let Carlos come to him and try to catch him? Maybe. But he didn't do a good job of changing the game plan until that fifth round, until he let out everything he had, which credit to him. I mean, that's what he needed to do in the fifth round, and that's how he won the fight, 100%. And the reason why I'm doing this video is, besides him being one of my favorites, besides being one of the biggest robberies I've ever seen in the UFC, I want people to remember that a fight is crazy, and as good as the fight is, people forget that the motivation, these judges can take away everything. Because there's a lot of fights where you see judges take, like Zhumagalov, I believe that's who it is, lost 2 or 3 split decisions in a row, or 2 decisions in a row against Jeff Molina and Charles Johnson, both fights that I believe he won. And he retired. And after the Jeff Molina thing came out, all of those things, he decided to come back. He hasn't fought yet because of cancellations, but still has come back. I guarantee you he does everything he can not to go to the judges. These judges took away what could have been a life's work for Carlos Condit. They took away his defining moment in the sport. The chin, the determination, everything. If you were a fan of Carlos in the WEC and you tuned in that fight to watch him, and you watched his UFC career up until that, and you watched that fight, everything went together. Game plan, the output, every single thing came together for that, and the judges took it away. Whether you thought Robbie won 2 rounds or not, there's not a third round that Robbie Lawler won in that fight. I don't care who you are. Explain to me which one. Yeah, were there a couple of close ones? Maybe. Robbie Lawler did not win a third round. A third round. I'm not saying the third round, but a third round. He won 2 rounds, and that's being generous. I think he won that 5th round, and that's the only one you can say. So again, remember, some of these fighters we lose to retirement because they're older, because they can't do it anymore. Sometimes, in Carlos Condit's case, we lose fighters because of motivation, because of something that was taken, something that they went there and they performed. Somehow it still wasn't enough. It's a shame. But just remember, there's not many fighters that fought like Cowboy Cerrone, that fought like Carlos Condit. There just isn't. He's one of my favorites. I hope you guys appreciate it. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. I hope you guys liked the video. If you do, let me know. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And as always, peace.